What's up, everybody? GeauxBurns doing another episode of my Discuss series. Today, we're talking about time in Grand Theft Auto Online. So, there's been an interesting discussion, a theory going on with the game for quite some time now regarding exactly where the Grand Theft Auto timeline resides. By the way, you are welcome to chime in below in the comment section regarding your thoughts, your views, your ideas, your theories when it comes to the Grand Theft Auto Online timeline. So we have an established timeline, and then we have the quote-unquote new timeline. So it's like two timelines going on in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now first, we have to go back to the very beginning of Grand Theft Auto Online. Launch October 2013. Now, at launch, when you create your character at the very beginning, whether you did so from the beginning back in October or you did so a year later whenever it came out on current gen or on PC in 2015 or just a few months ago, it starts the same for everybody. You're the protagonist. You fly into Los Santos from Liberty City, that's where the protagonist is supposedly from, in order to start a new life in crime. Now, the timeline at the beginning of Grand Theft Auto Online at that point is set officially 6 months prior to the quote-unquote present day 2013 events in Grand Theft Auto 5 story. Not the stuff that happens in North Yankton 10 years prior, 9 years prior, a few years prior, but what happens in 2013 with Franklin, Michael, and Trevor. That's where the original Grand Theft Auto timeline is. The first half of the timeline, anyways, because it's broken up into two parts, from the way I'm looking at it. All right, so the protagonist had a correspondence with Lamar. And most of you know Lamar from Grand Theft Auto 5 story, as he's the one who talks the protagonist into coming out to Los Santos from Liberty City. He's the one who introduces you to the city, and he's one of the first guys you get to do missions for. He also introduces you to Gerald, then eventually you make other connections, as well as bosses that you work for. Simeon, Lester, Ron, Trevor, as well as Martin Mendraza. So at the beginning, you're doing the rags to riches thing. You are at the very bottom of the criminal underworld, and you're just trying to make a better life for yourself. Whatever you left behind in Liberty City, it's in your past. You don't want to talk about it. It is what it is. But you're starting over, basically, completely over with the clothes on your back. And you start off with, finding a car on the street. Simeon's kind enough to, offer to pay for the, complimentary customization for that first vehicle you get. And then, of course, everything else is on you. From purchasing a two-car garage, which is, only $25,000. Then, of course, eventually, as you make a little bit more money, you're able to move up to a 6-car apartment. Then, of course, at the time, the dream back then was to get one of the nice high-end apartments with a 10-car garage. That was the dream in the original timeline. But things eventually changed. Life started getting a little bit better for the protagonist. And eventually, the protagonist was making enough money and had enough connections and influence that they were able to start purchasing some more property, going from, one apartment and 10 cars to 2 apartments and 20 cars to eventually, they kept being able to purchase more property as time progressed. And the ability to buy the nicer things like nicer clothing, weapons, cars, lots of cars, sports cars, supercars, even some military hardware from Warstock like the Buzzard attack helicopter, tanks, etc. And all the updates that came out previous to Heist kind of, point in that direction of the protagonist, slowly but surely, climbing the ladder in the criminal otherworld. Because you got Beach Bum, what's one of the first things you're going to do whenever you move out to a city by the beach? You want to go chill on the beach, right? You want to go chill on the beach. You want to sit on the beach, lollygagging, just take it all in. And I guess that's kind of what Beach Bum was all about, just taking it all in. With the shorts, the tank tops, all the beach attire. And then, of course, we started getting more stuff that geared us towards, the rise from, low-level, criminal, hand to, your destiny as a future criminal underworld mastermind. So we got the business update, high life, various others, adding more content to the game, nicer content as well. for you to spend that money on. You were making from various missions through all those bosses I mentioned, like Lamar, Gerald, Simeon, Lester, Ron, Trevor, Martin, and other things that you were able to do around town, like getting into races, LTSs, other activities as well in order to make money. Then we reach the climax of the first act of the timeline, the heist. And the heist came out in spring of 2015. And the way I see it, this is from my point of view. This is my theory about the timeline, by the way. Lester finally realizes that you've made such a name for yourself. You've got enough street cred going on. You've worked for him a few times. He sees potential in you, and he's ready for you to make the step up to the big leagues, which is when you start being able to do heists, along with other protagonists that have come to Los Santos as well. From the Fleeca job, which is a small job, to other jobs, all the way up to Pacific Standard, which is the big job, the big score for the protagonist in Grand Theft Auto Online. But in between, on that journey to becoming a criminal mastermind in heists, there were other jobs that came your way. Like, for example, Prison Break, as well as Humane Labs. You were introduced to another important character, Agent 14, who will come along later down the road, as well as Trevor. He was impressed with some of the stuff you did for him, so he shows up at your apartment along with Ron, and he offers you a heist job to help him out through Series A funding. And once you accomplish these heists, that's when the new timeline begins, in my opinion. That's when you leap past the old timeline and you go from working your way up to now the sky's the limit for you. You are now at the top of your game. You've gone from a higher hand to now crime boss of Liberty City and Blaine County. And I think that's pretty apparent from the updates that follow heists. Ill-Gotten Gains Part 1 and 2 added a lot of really expensive content. And, for example, the supercars, the Osiris, the T20, as well as the, Luxor Deluxe and the Swift Deluxe, and a lot of nicer clothing as well. Plus it was a convenient way for, Rockstar to make more money off of us. But that's a side issue. We're sticking with the timeline, people. All right, so from there, we got nicer things, like yachts. We were able to now get a yacht because of the fact that we had amassed this wealth and this power and this position within the criminal underworld where we could buy our own yacht. And eventually we could buy our own customizable penthouse if we felt so inclined, as well as even homes up in Vinewood Hills. And then the change became very apparent when it comes to the timeline when Lowriders was introduced with Benny's Garage, because if you go into Grand Theft Auto 5 story, there is no Benny's Garage. It doesn't exist. And that led a lot of us to wonder, well, what is this about? Did Benny's once exist 6 months prior to the present-day events of Grand Theft Auto 5 story and shut down? Or does this mean that there's a new timeline for Grand Theft Auto Online, which is the theory we're going into now? So sometime after the events of Grand Theft Auto 5 story, Lamar, he's doing quite well for himself, probably with the help of Franklin, who's living the life up in Vinewood. And, he gets in with Benny's, and, he gets you involved in it. The same protagonist that he invited to come out to, Los Santos from Liberty City. He sees how well you're doing, and he's like, hey, I got this thing going on with Benny. You can get some lowriders. You can also do some more missions for me. And from there, it took off. It became very, very apparent that we now live in a new timeline that's actually going forward, as opposed to being set prior to the events of Grand Theft Auto 5. We're going beyond Grand Theft Auto 5 story now in Grand Theft Auto Online with the updates going, ill-gotten gains through lowriders and, present day. So we got Benny's Garage, and eventually we got executive offices and warehouses, as well as the motorcycle club with the businesses, exporting high-end cars, the bunkers with the MOC, along with the research and production of arms. That's when Agent 14 comes back into the picture. And of course, most recently, last week, with the Smuggler's Run update, we now have the ability to purchase a hangar either down in LSIA or at Fort Zancudo. So you can imagine how powerful at this point the protagonist of Grand Theft Auto Online is to be able to go from only having a 2-car garage and maybe 1 or 2 cars, to now having the ability, the influence, to either buy a hangar down at LSIA or at a military base and having low-level clearance access. And yeah, I realize that the protagonist is your character, and the way you take your character is differently than the direction I take my character, or my characters, because I technically have 3 of them, but 2 of them I really focus on, but side issue. Yeah, so it doesn't really matter if you focus on the biker aspect or import-exporting or the warehouses, the bunker, or the hangar, along with the new sourcing jobs that come with the hangar. The point is, your character has finally made it big in the criminal underworld. All the way back from the very beginning, when you first fly into Los Santos from Liberty City. So here's some points I want to make to back up my theory that we have a time shift going on in Grand Theft Auto Online. Some of it I've already mentioned, like the fact the Ill-Gotten Gains Part 1 and 2, as well as Lowriders, shows us a post-heist world, which was the climax of the first act of Grand Theft Auto Online, whereas this might be the second act. Could be the final act, I don't know. So, yeah, like I said, Benny's exists in Grand Theft Auto Online, where in Grand Theft Auto 5 story, it doesn't exist. So I already established that about Benny's. But during one of the Lamar Lowrider missions, Lamar asks you to help Gerald escape Los Santos. Now, Gerald is one of the first bosses you're introduced to in Grand Theft Auto Online. He's one of the first guys you work for. And now that, this is set going forward, Gerald has to get out of the city, and you help Gerald escape. So once again, it shows a time shift in the game. And yes, I realize, despite the fact that this mission exists, you can still go do the Gerald missions. I mean, there's some issues to the timeline. I will give you that. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then, of course, the fact that Agent 14, during one of the bunker missions, says this.
Yeah, it's 2017. I can't believe it either.
Some of us thought that either A, that was an accident, a faux pas on Rockstar's fault, from the writing department, or it was another tell that Rockstar had moved forward with the timeline when it came to Grand Theft Auto Online. And I think this has become very apparent with what transpires when you first meet Ron in the hangar in Smuggler's Run.
Oh, you're my new partner. You bought into the place. You're late. What kept you? Yeah, well, it's too late. That bastard Trev. My best friend? Oh, he's supposed to protect me forever? Then he goes all Vinewood on me. He's too important for Ron now. But he's a guru. He's a lifestyle coach. I don't know what he is. I bet he's got abs.
So that pretty much confirms 2 things. 1, the timeline in Grand Theft Auto Online has moved forward. It's no longer 6 months prior to the events of Grand Theft Auto 5 story. Unless you just started the game and, you just started your character and you haven't gotten to the point where you've done heist yet or gotten all this other cool stuff yet, like the executive office, garage, as well as the biker clubhouse, or businesses that come with it, the bunkers, import-exporting, the hangar. If you haven't done any of that yet, I guess you still live in the past, man. That's so 2013. But regarding Grand Theft Auto 5, it confirms another thing, that Option C in the finale of Grand Theft Auto 5 story has to be canon because, spoilers, Trevor survives. And chances are Michael probably also survived as well, because that option never made any sense. So Option C, where Franklin chooses to save both Trevor and Michael, must be canon, especially if you go by this artwork that was officially made for Grand Theft Auto 5. And that clearly shows you the outcome of Option C. So I think we can pretty much say that Option C is canon for Grand Theft Auto 5 story. Whereas, not only Franklin's still alive and Michael, but so is Trevor. Apparently, according to Ron, living the sweet life in Vinewood Hills as some sort of lifestyle coaching guru. Now, some of you are probably once again saying, GeauxBurns, okay, so let's just say you're right, that the timeline has moved forward, that's progressing in present day time now. What about the TV radio stations and commercials and other stuff that's obvious, 2013? Well, I mean, to be honest, who listens to the TV or the radio stations anymore? The game's, nearly 4 years old now. I think that's just a minor issue, a technicality, something that would cost way too much money for Rockstar to go fix and update and retweak. You'd have to get all the DJs like Laszlo, like Kara, who's now a model, movie star. You had to get all of them to come back and make new lines, along with Kenny Loggins, a.k.a. Captain Loggins. You'd have to get copyright for more music. So, yeah, I don't see that exactly transpiring. So I don't think that we really can take the fact that the TV, radio stations, and the commercials are still dated. You kind of have to ignore that aspect when it comes to the Grand Theft Auto Online timeline. But I can also make another point, the fact that some of the vehicles that have come out in these past few updates are obviously post-2013. So they exist in a time after Grand Theft Auto 5 story. I'm just saying. So anyways, that's my views and opinions regarding the Grand Theft Auto 5 timeline. We have the old timeline, Act 1, which is 2013, with the protagonist, spending the first few months, working his way up or her way up, depending on which way you go of your protagonist, to each their own. And eventually, post-heist, we see it set forward in time, going present day from, Lamar at Lowriders, along with Benny's, to the executive offices, along with the motorcycle clubs, the import-exporting, high-end cars, as well as the bunkers, and, of course, most recently, the hangars with Nervous Ron. So let me know your opinion below in the comment section, your thoughts, your views regarding the Grand Theft Auto Online timeline. Do you believe that we have seen a time shift, a time break, in Act 1 and in Act 2? Or is it all still set in the past, man, and I'm just crazy? I'm just throwing out a wild conspiracy theory worthy of Nervous Ron himself. Speaking of timelines, coming up 1 week from today, we have the next monthly installment of Q&A. Q&A 28.0. It's your opportunity to ask me whatever question you want concerning Grand Theft Auto Online, gaming in general, YouTube, personal questions, advice, thoughts, views, opinions, etc. One question per person, please. And you can submit your question anytime between today and this coming Friday, September 8th, via the comment section, Twitter, or Facebook. Links are, of course, found below in the description section, so be sure and submit your question as soon as possible between now and, once again, September 8th, this coming Friday, via comments, Facebook, Twitter, by this coming Friday, September 8th, in order to be included in Q&A 28.0.